This time of the year, we're always beginning to turn our attention towards spring football, and there's certain things that kind of identify this. It really helps us turn the page. We had Brad Edwards on yesterday from ESPN talking about the Football Power Index that was published on Thursday. We went through and we talked about the SEC, but really we're going to dive a little deeper into the Alabama. Alex Scarborough, also from ESPN, Alabama Spring Football Preview. Tide looked to regroup after title loss, and a really in-depth piece that we're gonna get into here with Alex. So we begin to turn the page. Alex, I hope you've enjoyed the off time. It's all about 4 weeks now, and now we're right back to football talk.
Yeah, it was a little blip on the radar. We got to wait and hold our breath until we got the coaching staff finally released. That felt like weeks in the making. But we're finally got over that hump, and now we got to look forward to the start of spring football, A-Day, Pro Day, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and I tried to guess, but if we've got to complete 15 days of practice, I assume that A-Day will be the final one. So when you look at April the 13th, you would expect spring football to start. It's got to start before spring break, right? I mean, doesn't it have to start like right there around the first week of March? I mean, if you think.
You'd think so. I mean, I think they've done that in the past where you do a little install, you take a break, and then you come back. So they've sort of gone that route before. But, with Nick Saban, it's all there's a calendar in his mind, and he's going to stick to it, and we'll know it at the last minute.
You never know. Let's go back to coaching staffs. What's the best hire Nick Saban made this offseason? In your opinion, looking at the 7 new coaches coming to Tuscaloosa, what is the best hire Nick Saban made?
It's interesting to me. It's hard to put a finger on. I don't know if it's the best hire, but I'm very intrigued with what Steve Sarkisian does coming back, because I think there was a little bit of understandably some bitter taste left in some fans' mouth with just one game, obviously losing the national championship. But that was a really difficult situation to walk into, and I just wonder what he's able to do coming back, his relationship with Tua, all the firepower they have on offense. But the one I sort of look to as addressing a need and really returning to what Nick Saban does is the return of Sal Sunseri to coach outside linebackers. He knows what Nick Saban is about, where maybe some of those folks on the staff previous years weren't quite as familiar. He's been with them for a long time, and maybe he brings a little bit better production to that outside linebacker, pass rushing sort of position where they've sort of been a little bit inconsistent. Some of that due to injuries, some of it due to maybe some development issues. I think Sal Sunseri's return could be a really big boon for Alabama. But the other one, obviously, like I said, I think if you're looking at a stock and you look at maybe buying low on somebody, if you're looking at fan expectations, I do think Steve Sarkisian's an interesting coach to bring back to Alabama.
No, I 100% agree, because I remember going back when he was first hired here, and you begin to talk to the players, you begin to talk to local media guys who covered him. I remember featuring Brock Heward, some of the guys that have worked with him, and they were like, oh, this guy's sharp. I mean, he is a brilliant offensive mind. So I remember the excitement there, and then you get to the championship game, which we hold him to that, but I'm not sure it's fair to hold him to that and sort of put that blame on him. I think you got to blame some of Nick Saban and a little bit of Lane Kiffin, and maybe combine the two.
Well, 100%. I mean, when you make a change at coordinator, a week before the biggest game of the year, where nobody's really expecting it, and you have a true freshman quarterback at the time, and you're going up against one of the best quarterbacks on the other side of the field that we've seen in a really long time, it was a recipe for disaster. So in that respect, it's sort of remarkable that they were able to have the success they did. Now, I will say that the minute Alabama seems to be abandoning a running game, we're going to look back on that game and say, well, why weren't you running both Scarborough then? We should have known all this way back when. But, again, you look at these coaches like a Steve Sarkisian, and I say the same thing about a Butch Jones. They get to these levels as former head coaches for a reason. They're talented coaches who know how to develop players, know how to communicate. They have those skills. They wouldn't have gotten to those heights if they didn't. So there is a lot of potential there, I think, with the return of Sark.
Alex, I want you to help me get up on a different thing. I'm hung up on this, and I want to go to Chris Lowe from ESPN. He was with us a couple of weeks ago, And he told us that the play calling responsibility changed in September from Tosh Lapoy to Pete Golding. And I've said this to multiple times to the audience because we threw darts at Tosh Lapoy. But if he wasn't the play caller, then those same darts that we were throwing, it's not like that we can take those back. You got to put them at somebody. And if Pete Golding was the play caller, sure, he was pressed into a responsibility that he didn't think that he had going into the season. Maybe that hurt with the development of the middle linebackers. I mean, that group did not play quite well, didn't have a great season. Should I be excited about Pete Golding, the new defensive coordinator at Alabama, now with the official title, or do you still go back and hold some accountability? I don't know if this is a home run hire for Nick Saban.
I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think it is really easy to slap a new label on it and look at it in the rearview mirror and say that, he was the play caller all along. Well, if you're going to say that, and that's, by the way, the truth is what I heard for a really long time is that, that Tosh may have had it in title, but he wasn't actually doing it in practice, that Pete Golding was the guy. Well, you do have to hold him to that standard that he was the one calling the defense. But I think you hit the other side of it, which was maybe the development at that position in particular, and the linebackers as a whole, needed to be better. Maybe the personnel there as a whole wasn't what it needed to be when you look at injuries, when you look at players maybe not developing the way you thought they might. I mean, Mack Wilson looked like he should have been an All-American by every right, and scouts are going to fall in love with everything he is capable of physically, but there was a little something that was missing there to take him from good to great. So you need the development, you need all of those pieces in place. So I think Alabama coaches as a whole are held to a higher standard, and I think that's why I don't give Pete Golding a bad rap, because he is young, he is new, relatively new in this business, and he did rise to a level where Nick Saban looked at him and said, even though I have Tosh here, I think you're the guy to do this. So there's obviously potential there. Maybe it's a growing pains thing. Maybe last year is the year that gets him in a better place, because you do learn in this profession. I think he's a very well-regarded guy in terms of his intelligence, and he always has Nick Saban to fall back on to in terms of what are we going to do defensively, how do we want to set things up through the week. So I understand not looking at it as a, quote, a home run or an A-plus hire, because maybe last year's results are weighing on your mind, but he still does have the potential. I still think it's good to keep him in staff, because if Nick Saban sees something in him for a guy who came from University of Texas San Antonio to Alabama, there's got to be something there that could grow and get even bigger and better.
Well, no, I totally agree. I think he's a superstar in the making. And one of the other parts of it may be when Nick Saban looks at him, he says, I'm not going to lose this guy to a head coach in job in 1 year. I'm going to be able to keep him, for hopefully a couple of years. I may not be able to keep him a long term, but I can at least survive another year without having to make more coordinator switches. Because on the flip side of that, you would think if Sark comes in here and just blows it out of the water, then he's going to be a candidate somewhere. Somebody's going to overlook the baggage and say, hey, this guy can coach, and with so many jobs out there. So maybe that's what Nick Saban is looking long-term, saying if I can get him where I need to be, he may be with me more than just 1 year.
Yeah, I do think there's something to that, because what I heard when he first came in was there are a lot of parallels drawn to when Nick got Kirby Smart early on, looking at a guy who's really young but has that potential, somebody you can sort of mold over the years. So I think Pete could be that guy, and I think that's what Alabama needed to do with his coaching staff, is balance two things. I think they needed to bring coaches like Sal Sunseri back who knew the system, who knew what was expected of them, but also get guys in and retain guys in the case of Coach Golding, who you think can be here for multiple years, because while there's always going to be turnover on your staff, you need to have some better consistency than Alabama's had over the course of the last two seasons, because it's going to catch up with you on two fronts. It's going to catch up with you, number one, in recruiting, if you're not able to maintain those relationships year over year, and number two, in terms of development, what you see on the field. So I think I do like overall the mix that they were able to get with guys who know the system, and then retaining guys like a Pete Golding, who maybe Nick Saban thinks I can keep here as more than just a stopgap until the next guy leaves and I've got to fill it with another guy.
Biggest competition battle when you look at this spring, and we're talking to Alex Scarborough right now from ESPN, who just put up a great article a couple of days ago when we began to look at the conversation with Alabama spring football preview. Tide looks to regroup after the title loss. Simple. Go to ESPN.com, find the NCAA college football tab. You'll find Alabama. Click that. It'll be one of the first articles that'll pop up there. Alex, what's the biggest competition that you'll be glued into?
I think the most important one continues to be the inside linebacker position. I think that's really the thing that let them down in the national championship. And really, if you go back to the second half of the Orange Bowl against Oklahoma, you saw too many big plays. You saw too many defenses that were out of alignment. You saw too many missed tackles. And we grade everything on a scale. You're grading it the standard of Alabama, but it wasn't the standard that you'd become accustomed to. So they need to get better production and better, quarterbacking of the defense, quote unquote, from that position. So Mack Wilson obviously gone. How do you fill that role? Obviously, you have Cahill there. You've got Markel Benton as a couple of options. There's some young guys who can come up and maybe play a role. But the development of Dylan Moses, to me, could be really interesting, whether he slides over to that Mike linebacker position and really calls the defense or not. I still am really high on what his development it can be. His athleticism is really off the chart, and I think we're just waiting for the breakthrough moment for him. And if that happens next year and really lifts the inside linebacker position as a whole, I think it could be a really, a sign of good things to come for Alabama, because that was the one thing. The secondary was always going to be what it was last year with not returning any starters. But the inside linebacker position, I think, was where they needed help. And I think this offseason, this spring, is where they're going to really need to solidify there so the rest of the defense can sort of grow from there out, because that is where everything sort of starts.
Biggest question on the offensive side of the football?
It's kind of twofold. I do want to see what the offensive line holds, obviously losing some veterans there. And I'm really sort of interested in the running back position as a whole. I feel good about it. I don't think it's going to be a problem for Alabama, not when you have Najee Harris coming back. But I think everybody's sort of sleeping on Brian Robinson. I think there could be some really interesting how that shakes out there, especially with the recruits they have coming in. If Najee Harris can sort of round out his game, I know Alabama fans were always wondering why he wasn't playing more. And the answer was pretty simple. He had to really learn how to block and become a well-rounded back in the way that Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris were. If he can do that and they get a really strong 1-2 punch there, that's going to make an already dynamic offense with everything they have coming back in the passing game even more potent. So I sort of look at two different things there with the line and the running back.
Alex Scarborough, ESPN.com. Alex, real quick, let me get your take. FPI, 10 teams from the SEC in the top 20, 3 in the top 5. Is there a chance? I mean, is the SEC going to get back to the sort of dog-eat-dog world that we were a couple of years ago, where the strength of this league? I mean, that is a lot of teams in the top 20 and 3 teams in the top 5, according to Football Power Index.
I think for the SEC to get back where they were 4 or 5 years ago, where it really was the reputation of the conference became what it was, in my opinion. It's 2 teams in particular that are going to have to rise and become legitimate national championship contenders. One of those is LSU, and they've got a long way to go, I think, in terms of offense. They have a lot of skill there. The other one needs to be Florida. Somebody has to challenge Georgia in the East, and I like what Dan Mullen's building there. He's got to find a way to make it to either develop or find a difference maker at quarterback. If Florida and LSU are teams to be reckoned with, I think the whole conference as a whole starts to look a lot better than it has in the last couple of years, where it has been a little bit top-heavy when you look at Alabama and Georgia.
Alex Scarborough, connect with him. Find him on ESPN.com, but also find him on the Twitter account, AlexS_ESPN, AlexS_ESPN, covering, really focusing on the SEC college football scene, but covering a lot of the college sports for ESPN.com. Alex, as always, thank you so much for being a part of the show. Hope you have a great afternoon, man.
You too.